My name is Bella Bathurst. I'm the author of Sound, and I lost my hearing when I was roughly 28. So, Sound is the story partly of my own experience, but also of the wider story about deafness and hearing loss and what happens when you lose it, and then, in my case, get it back.
So you've got a really fascinating story, and you say you lost your hearing at 28 years old. How? What happened?
I had two head injuries in my 20s, and after the second one, which is a car accident, I started to go deaf in both ears quite rapidly. So it looked like there was a very strong link to the accident. So went off, had all the kind of standard hearing tests. They kind of went, yeah, absolutely. It's kind of hearing loss, and you're already down by a kind of significant percentage. Here's some NHS hearing aids, and this is an incurable condition, and like all, but painless, but incurable. I mean, you will just kind of slowly lose your hearing, and we will improve the kind of hearing aids, but that's just the job. Long story short, but about 14 years later, I was sort of retested and re-diagnosed, and it turned out that the condition that I had was not linked to the injury. It was a genetic condition called otosclerosis, which is one of the very, very few operable conditions. So I went off to France because there's a place there where they churn out stapedectomies, as they're called, where they insert a prosthetic stapes into the ear and get it working again, get the whole sort of mechanism sort of working again. Had one ear done 1 year, had the other ear done the following year, and I had a particularly good outcome from that stapedectomy, and I'm back to, touch wood, about kind of 90% of normal hearing. And then just wanted to forget about the whole experience for a long time. And after about 7 years, decided that there was so much to talk about in terms of hearing, not just my experience, but I kept coming across people in their kind of, 20s and 30s like me, who for various reasons had lost their hearing, quite often to do with sort of, music, gigs, exposure to loud noises, whatever it happened to be, and who was struggling to know how to cope with it, really. Anyway, I wrote a book called Sound, which concentrates just as much on those things and about the wider background of hearing. And yes, I mean, it was sort of, the scaffolding was my own experience, and then everything else was built around that.
But if we go back to the point at which you lost your hearing, and obviously at that point you thought, well, this is it. This is my hearing gone. What was that like? How did it change your life?
Well, at the time I was working as a journalist and writer, and I mean, just on a sort of practical level, I do a lot of interviews. I still do a lot of interviews, and you kind of need to be able to hear the responses, just as you do with everything. It doesn't matter what job you do. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're kind of, or you're an accountant, a politician, kind of whatever. You need to be able to interact with your fellow human beings, and the way that you do that is through your hearing. You need to be able to hear their responses and communicate yours. So it was kind of, I gotta say, it was difficult because there was nobody in my friendship group, in my kind of wider circle, who was going through something similar. You kind of think of hearing loss as a very sort of old people condition. everybody has, sort of wear and tear, and once you get into your 70s and 80s, there is a kind of high probability that you will have some hearing loss. When you're in your 20s, everybody's got perfect hearing, or kind of sort of not too bad. And sort of saying, look, I I'm just grabbing for things in a sentence and making wild guesses for what you're saying, and sometimes I get it wrong, or I blank you, or just end up exhausted at the end of an evening. It's kind of difficult. So you cover it, you kind of mask it.
And was that human connection, was that the thing you missed the most, or was there something else, like, for example, music or the sound of nature or something?
I missed music enormously, enormously. I mean, I still went to gigs, and most gigs are kind of loud enough that something gets through. Um, bird song crops up. If you ask people who have lost all or part of their hearing for whatever reason, doesn't matter what age or what situation, or kind of what reason for losing their hearing, they all say one of the things that they miss is birdsong,
Mm.
because I think birdsong is kind of a sign of normality. Uh, it's kind of, and also it's so joyful. I mean, it's a good thing. And with but the biggest thing of all is just communication with your fellow human being, with your partner, with your children, with your kind of wider family, with kind of whoever it is. You expect to be able to communicate, and when that link gets more tenuous, it really knocks you, no question.
And from writing the book, you said you spoke to a number of people who've lost their hearing for lots of different reasons. And often you mentioned listening to loud music or very loud noises. Do you think those people that you spoke to, did they really understand what they were doing at the time? Or were they completely oblivious to the fact that these actions they were taking were going to result in this problem at the end of it?
I think they were not totally oblivious. They realized that it had the potential to be damaging, but I don't think they realized that if you come out of a gig with your ears ringing, or you feel kind of, or kind of, or if you're consistently going to places where you're exposed to sounds which are kind of louder than is comfortable, that you are storing up damage, basically. So no, I don't think people were aware enough. And also there was and is still a thing about kind of wearing earplugs, or God forbid ear defenders, or kind of whatever. I mean, it rock music is supposed to be heard loud. That's the deal. It's always turned up to 11. And it's just, I mean, it's like thing kind of, it's just not very rock and roll. It is to be kind of standing there with a pair of ear defenders on. So there's a kind of, it's not cool aspect to it as well. So you would, so I quite regularly kind of, sort of hand out earplugs, to anybody around me, kind of at gigs, and most people just go, no, it's that, no, no, thanks, I don't want them. So I think there is a sort of, yeah, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna style this one out, and then kind of deal with the damage as it happens, if the damage happens, thing. And that hasn't changed in all the time that rock music has existed.
And I'm guessing of all those people you spoke to, there wasn't anybody there who actually turned around and said, yeah, do you know what? It was worth losing my hearing for.
I don't think so. I mean, I think all of I mean I think that's a really interesting one, because I think there are a lot of people within the music industry who wouldn't necessarily exchange the experiences that they had and the things that they did, but are just really, really struggling now with the isolation that hearing loss can cause. So, what do you what do you do? I mean, you had a great life, you did some amazing things, you're paying the price now. But would you swap it? I don't know. I don't know. It's a really interesting one. I mean, it doesn't have to be. The thing is that it doesn't now have to be an either or. You can do the kind of noise filtering kind of earplugs and all the rest of it. But it used to be that it was either or.
So talking of that then, because I certainly, coming from a similar background, my background's radio, spending a lot of time with headphones on, again, now I've always been, I'm not a very good at loud noises. I find it kind of frazzles my brain a bit. So I suppose in a way I was lucky that I was used to have everything turned down very low because I just didn't like the feeling of loud noise. But I know plenty of people I worked with on radio stations who'd have their headphones up really loud. And for them, that meant that it was about hearing the noise, hearing the transitions, enjoying the music they were playing, but also that it made it easier for them to work because you could actually hear the difference between what was going on and so on. So we've got this kind of background where, as you say, there's the coolness, there's, actually sometimes you just have to because it makes working easier. But you mentioned that that has changed and there are alternatives. So what could people like myself who are working in radio, or like you going to gigs, or anybody for that matter working in the music industry or anywhere else, what are the things that you can now do that perhaps you couldn't do 20 years ago or so?
I think a lot of it is down to knowledge and mindset. I mean, there are good, as I say, kind of noise cancelling uh, or noise filtering earplugs. I mean, and also you can use AirPods as earplugs as well. I mean, there are. And also, I mean, I had quite often sort of take a tip off something that I found out when I was researching sound, which was that the Irish Army were issued with such poor, or weren't issued with any kind of form of hearing protection. So they improvised at one stage earplugs out of cigarette filters. So if desperate at a gig, I would just snap the ends off. If somebody around me had a cigarette, I would stuff the clean filters in kind of either ear. Well, it's a treat, really does, because it gives your, even if you can just kind of find one filter and kind of shove it down one end, and then swap it round. It gives your ears a rest, basically. So you can go the whole, whatever it is, 2.5 hours or kind of 2 hours or whatever to gig at high volume, and your ears are fine because you've just been kind of swapping around those. Whereas the people who haven't necessarily been doing that will be, struggling a little bit. So it's just kind of tiny things like that.
And I guess that's one of the messages, isn't it? Because as I understand it, there's the time that you're exposed to the sound, and obviously there's the volume of the sound, but there's also the type of sound as well. So if you can kind of juggle those three things around, so maybe very high volume, but not for very long, or lower volume, but for a bit longer, those things can kind of balance each other out a bit. And that's where your kind of earplugs in either ear comes into its own, doesn't it? Because you say your ears are working independently, essentially, in terms of how they're built, and therefore giving one a rest and letting the other go gives you that sort of solution. I know also that there are things like, apps like Hear Angel and so on that you can actually track your your sound exposure as well, and it will say to you you've had, so many hours at so many decibels, or on those kind of things, which will also help you. So I think, as you say, that there is a lot more around today, and it hasn't got to be an expensive thing, and you haven't got to be at the gig with these massive kind of like roadwork ear defenders on, looking like a little bit of a nonk. Yes, okay, you're doing the sensible thing, but I completely get it. I know from, going horse riding, there's that thing of wearing a riding hat or wearing a cowboy hat, what looks cooler. And we all like that. But I think, as you say, there are things that are easy to do, much less expensive these days. So I think that's a great thing. Do you, again, speaking to the people that you've spoken to in researching the book and things, and so on, do you think young people are more at risk, perhaps because we've got more of an epidemic of little earbuds in and, watching stuff on social media and things, or do you think they're actually better informed, and despite the bigger opportunity for exposure, they're perhaps better, they're mitigating it better?
I mean, I think the opportunities to be better informed are there, and I think a little bit of the stigma is beginning to fade. I think in terms of sort of, but awareness doesn't necessarily translate into sort of action. So what's kind of and the degree to which people are sort of quite often consistently exposed to very loud sound. If you are listening to kind of music through headphones on the tube, or kind of on your computer for 4 or 5 hours a day, or gaming, then your exposure is kind of, is day in, day out at uncomfortable volumes. And I don't think there's enough awareness of the kind of lifelong damage. So I think if anything, it's worse. I think the remedies are getting better. So, come the day when you actually get fitted for hearing aids, which you really don't want in your kind of, 20s, 30s, whatever, then those digital hearing aids are improving all the time. But you don't want the remedy in the first place, to be totally honest. You want to be able to find an effective way of kind of still enjoying life, and still enjoying kind of gaming or gigs or kind of whatever it is, but without ruining your hearing for the future.
So just in the last few minutes, tell me about getting your hearing back. So we've talked a lot about what it was like not to have it. We've talked about the things, that it affects and things. But that moment when I guess, yes, there was a moment when you could hear again, but there must have been a moment when you just kind of went, oh, this is it. I've kind of got my old life back.
It was a kind of slow grand reveal in some ways. But there was one sort of key moment when I went off to a concert with a friend. It was a sort of classical music thing, not my normal sort of cup of tea at all. But it was a sort of it was unamplified as far as I know. It was a concert hall with brilliant acoustics. It was an amazing orchestra. I didn't know the music at all. And I was sitting there with kind of very sort of, because they go in with this operation, they go in through the eardrum, and so it's all kind of, quite, the actual physical thing was still quite raw. And the conductor kind of raised his baton, and he brought it down, and everybody started playing, and it was extraordinary. It was like my DNA changed, my cell structure changed, because that it was the first time that I'd listened to unamplified, real, non-digital, non-digitally filtered sound music in 12, 14 years, thereabouts. And it was kind of, it was like the world was suddenly in color again. It was mind blowing. I mean, to say it was mind blowing kind of makes it sound kind of insignificant. I mean, it changed everything. It just kind of it illuminated everything. It was just it was extraordinary. It was completely extraordinary, and it made me realize that music isn't just a kind of, a kind of small thing. It's huge. I mean, it's essential.
So, having had that experience of music was absolutely an essential part of your life, what does that kind of, how does that leave you feeling about campaigns like, say, the Make Listening Safe campaign, which is all about trying to help people understand that, you're probably going to miss something if you lose your hearing.
I think it's essential. I think it's amazing. When I started to research the book and the kind of wider landscape around kind of hearing and deafness, and I was stunned by how little was written about it, how few campaigns there were about it, how general it was as a problem, but how it was this kind of complete Cinderella subject, basically. So, and kind of raising the profile is essential in order to give people the information that they need in order to be able to make a decision, basically, particularly amongst the young. So make listening safe, I think, is because it's concentrating more on that kind of younger demographic, is it's doing something great. If I mean, if it can give people the tools that they need in order to make their own decisions and some easy things that they can do in order to improve things, then absolutely brilliant. I mean, back in the day when I started to go deaf, there was just the RNID, the Royal National Institute for the Deaf, and that was it. And they were targeting very much an older kind of demographic. So I felt sort of completely sort of, floating in space. There was just nothing for me. There was nothing for my age range or kind of my interests, the sort of working life that I was leading at the time. And anything that kind of makes people realize, this does apply to you, even though you're younger, and this is what you could do. I mean, it would be brilliant.
And finally, you've touched obviously briefly on your story during this chat, and you've written that up in your book, Sound. Tell us a little bit more about kind of what I'm going to get from reading the book, but don't give me too much, obviously, because I want to read it.
I hope it'll give you a sense of just how gorgeous and precious and interesting hearing is, and what a sort of beautiful thing it is. And also kind of that there's a whole bunch of kind of extraordinary stories and people out there who have gone on amazing. I mean, it brought me in touch with kind of so many people sort of, in music and the military and, and people who were fighting their way through kind of either hearing loss or kind of working their way around it, or there's just a ton of interesting stuff. And what surprised me when I started to write about it was, as I say, that it was an open field. Nobody else was talking about this stuff. There seemed to be a kind of huge stigma around it, and it is the most fascinating subject. It really is. So, and I hope I've conveyed a bit of that in the book, basically.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much, Bella Bathurst, author of Sound.